Okay, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Let's see who's here. So Casey's here. Good morning, Casey again. Good morning, Min. Good morning, Karen. Good morning, Jenna. Ying is here. Good morning, Ying. Good morning, Cindy. Good morning, Mashid. I don't know if you guys notice this, but you notice that I'm more energetic and bubbly for this class than I am with social justice. I feel bad because I'm always I think I'm still waking up when we start social justice, but now I'm totally awake. So anyway, who else? Who else is here? Who else is here? Michael's here. Good morning, Michael. Good morning, Aliana. Good morning. Who just popped in? Carmen just popped in. Good morning, Carmen. Okay. So what we'll do today is we'll deal with this section that we just read from the textbook. So we'll finish up with our friend Confucius, talk a little bit about Taoism. I have something for you to do regarding technology that was invented in ancient China, because if you know anything about ancient China, you'll know that they were very ingenious inventors, and many of their inventions are things that we still use in the modern world today. We'll do that, and then I'll talk a little bit about the paper, the one we already wrote. Hello, Ella, and hello, Tika. There's a few of you who have sent me either emails or Microsoft Teams messages about those things, and so I will respond to you after class. I'm just busy with class, so I'll get back to you a little bit after. So don't panic. Okay, that said, let's dive in here. Okay, so good morning, Adalbert. So again, of course, we're talking about Confucius here, and of course, it's important to distinguish Confucius. He's really a philosopher, right? So up to this point, we had really been dealing with mostly religious traditions, so like ancient Egyptian religion and the Sumerian religion. We were dealing with Brahmanism and the beginnings of Hinduism. Those are all kind of religions. We talked about Buddhism and Jainism, which are religions or spiritual practices or traditions, depending on how you want to describe them. But Confucius is a little different, right? He's not necessarily a religious leader. He is a philosopher, right? He is someone who teaches us about wisdom and truth and how to live a good life. But those things are not really connected to the supernatural, right? They're not really connected to the gods or the afterlife or anything like that. He's a very humanistic personality. So he's interested in the world of humans, not so much in the world of the supernatural. Good morning, Sabrina, and hello again, Jimmy. Okay. So we watched a video there on Thursday and on Friday called Geniuses of the Ancient World, and this one was on Confucius. Good morning, Lynn. And we said that we met a young Confucius and said that, of course, he grew up practicing these traditional ancient Chinese rituals. Again, not in worship of a supreme god or supreme deity, but it was sort of a traditional practice to balance two great cosmic forces. And so we said those two forces were the dragon, which was kind of a heavenly or a cosmic force, and a phoenix, which was the earthly force. And these two forces were always kind of in struggle, always in conflict, and it was the job of people to conduct the appropriate rituals in order to balance these two forces. But the video suggested that Confucius kind of struggled with this because the rituals made it seem like the world was very ordered, but of course he was living in a time of chaos, right? He was living kind of in the Warring States period when political centralization was decreasing, and states were going to war with each other all the time. And so he felt that he lived in kind of a chaotic world. And so we said that, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. So he lived in a chaotic world, and our friend Confucius was trying to come to some understanding of how to create a stable, good, beneficial society, right? And so we said that he encountered Taoism, but he was frustrated. He didn't really like the idea that there was this cosmic supernatural force and that humans didn't really have a say in what was happening. He felt that humans had agency, right? Humans are able to change things. And so how can they? How can humans change things for the better? And again, that's a very philosophical question to ask. What Confucius eventually gets to is the idea that he's going to look to the past, right? And he sees the early part of the Zhou dynasty as this golden age when society was good and moral and upright. And so he's going to try to take lessons from the past and see if we can apply them to the present, right? And of course, that's often the reason we say that we study history, right? So that we can learn the lessons of the past. And so here Confucius is trying to do just that thing, right? So he reads Chinese history, he reads history from the early Zhou period. And one of the things he pulls out of that earlier historical period is this idea of do everything in accordance with humanity, right? And that's a really interesting thing to say because, again, many of the traditions that are around during this time are religious, right? And so the Taoists are saying do everything in accordance with the Tao, right? The Buddhists are saying do everything in order to relieve suffering, right? To give up a desire, right? Other religions are saying, do everything in accordance with the gods, right? With Shiva or with Vishnu or with Osiris, or with Yahweh, right? The Hebrew God. And so many other traditions are talking about how people should behave, but Confucius, very interestingly, is saying, don't do everything in accordance with the gods. Don't do everything in accordance with the sort of spiritual way or supernatural way that the universe works. He says, do everything in accordance with humanity, right? With the experience of being human, right? So that's a very non-religious approach. That's a secular approach, right? And so, so Confucius takes these ideas from these early Zhou kings, this sort of perception he has about social harmony, and he's going to try to bring it forward into the period that he's in, right? And so he studies, again, ancient Chinese history, he studies ancient Chinese ritual, and he tries to take these things from the past and give them new meaning for the present, okay? So there are all these kind of rituals that he practiced as a child, and he wasn't really sure what he was doing, I guess, maybe, but he comes to an understanding that those rituals need to be done with positive emotion, with purpose, with sincerity, right? And interestingly, he doesn't say do the rituals correctly so that the universe will be balanced, or he doesn't say do the rituals correctly to praise the gods. He says do the rituals correctly and sincerely, because if you do, then that will change who you are on the inside, right? This sort of correct action and correct emotion on the outside will change who you are on the inside, right? Which again is a very interesting approach, because many other people are looking for change to come from up there, right? To come from heaven. Or with Buddhists, for instance, they are looking for change to come from within, right? They are seeking enlightenment through inside work, inner work, right? Whereas Confucius is saying outside work. If you do the stuff out here, it will change in here. Whereas the Buddhists are saying change in here first, and then things outside will change. So there's a different kind of approach that Confucius has that's really kind of interesting here. All right, and so we watched the second half of that video on Friday. We said that there were all kinds of things that Confucius felt could help to change people for the better, right? And one of them was music. Playing an instrument could help harmonize and perfect people. So this is almost a form of art therapy or music therapy. We said that what Confucius was trying to do was change society on a grand scale, right? He was trying to create an ideal society, and he was going to do this by trying to create an ideal individual, right? By trying to create moral, virtuous, individual people, right? And so Confucius started to recognize the father-son relationship as one of the basis for this virtuous person, right? So I think, as you just read in the textbook, they talked about filial piety, right? So the idea that you have a way that you're expected to treat your family members, especially your mother and your father. You're supposed to respect them and honor them and care for them. And so Confucius kind of took this idea and said, can we get people to act like that out in society? Can people act with filial piety toward their rulers and toward their elders? And can rulers act that way? Can they act as fathers towards the people that they rule over, right? So again, he takes the relationship of the family and he tries to expand it to the rest of society, right? We said that our friend Confucius had a goal to hold political office, but we said that he wasn't very successful in that. But he did manage to collect a group of students around him, right? And again, he didn't pay attention to wealth or social class. It was all about intellect and desire, right? About wanting to make a change, wanting to achieve something, right? And so we said much of how these students were developing their thinking and Confucius, how he was teaching them, was through moral debate, right? Through conversations. And so we said that Confucius and his students would travel across China. They would interact with all sorts of different people and see all sorts of different situations. And then they would have conversations about them and debate them. And so a number of these conversations are preserved in the Analects, which you read about in the book and they mentioned in the documentary as well. And so Analects is a written document that talks about these conversations that Confucius and his students had, and also serves to tell us something about Confucius himself, right? The video talked about this idea of Ren, right, which is humanity or human-heartedness. And so the professor they were talking to in the video said that that all Confucian ideas are connected to this humanity, right, to this empathy. So not just intellect and intelligence, but intellect and intelligence with humanity, right? Not just justice, right? Not just punishment, but justice with humanity, right? That's what creates a moral and a virtuous society, is people acting with humanity, right? People acting with empathy. So what you would not wish for yourself, don't do to others, right? A very simple thing. So again, we said that Confucius wasn't his ideas weren't incredibly popular in his lifetime, right? We said that when he died, it was kind of it was kind of he kind of felt a little bit defeated, right? That he hadn't accomplished what he wanted to accomplish. He didn't manage to create a sort of virtuous ideal society, but unbeknownst to him, his ideas did continue to be taught, right? His students continued to pass on his Confucian ideas. And again, we heard that during the Han Dynasty, which comes a little later, I think after the Qin, under the Han Dynasty, the first Han emperor decided to kind of make a break from the tradition of earlier rulers, right? He said the last Qin king or Qin emperor was kind of brutal and violent and really awful toward the people. And so this new Han ruler was advised, hey, maybe you could rule in a different way, right? Maybe you can act in a virtuous and moral way rather than a brutal way. And that might be a way of getting people to do what you want, right? And so Confucian ideas are the ideas that this ruler uses to get people to follow him and get people to sort of behave themselves in society. And so from there, Confucian ideas begin to find their way into the government of the Han Dynasty, into the education system of the Han Dynasty. And like we saw in the video, sorry, I'm a little sniffy because I just sneezed. Like we saw in the video, those ideas have made their way down even to the present day. And so we saw a Confucian school where students are still studying based on the principles of Confucius, right? Okay, so I asked you these questions, right? I asked you to summarize the 5 important statements that Confucius made. Let's do that, okay? So the first one is that the first one? Oh, that's only half of the first one. Hang on. Cindy's on top of it. But this was the actual statement, right? He says the noble person is concerned with rightness. The small person is concerned with profit. And so Cindy says that the truly noble person is one who puts the right before personal gain and the desire for wealth and fame. Oh, okay, these are all of them. Okay, hang on. Okay, that's a lot. I'll come back to you, Cindy. You've got them all, but let's go one by one. Okay. So the noblest person is concerned with rightness. The small person is concerned with profit. So how can we kind of summarize that? So Tika says I was gonna say normal people. Noble people put right acts in front of personal interests. Morality is the core, so be filial to your grandparents and your parents. Human's highest virtue is humanity. Okay. Sabrina says, noble person puts right before personal gain and desire for wealth. Yeah. So again, there's a very secular flavor to this, right? Not a religious one, a secular one. If you want to be a good person, it's not about praying to God, right? It's not about achieving enlightenment. It's about putting other people's interests before your own, particularly the ones that are associated with money and with status and with rank, right? You need to put other people first. That's what it means to be noble, right? Is to think of other people before yourself, right? The second one is that Confucius says here that young men should be filial at home and respectful to their elders when away from home. And so, Cindy, I'm going to go back to you here because you said the practice of morality in the family is the root. Yeah. So, again, Confucius is recognizing a system that already works within families, right? Is the respect for elders, the respect for your parents and your grandparents, and even your ancestors who are already dead, right? There's a lot of respect that is held for that. And so Confucius is saying that, yeah, you should be filial. You should respect and honor your parents when you're at home. This is an easy one, I guess. And then when you go out into the world, you should take that attitude with you, and you should treat your elders in the same way, right? You should treat people who are older than you with respect, and with honor, right? And you can see how he's kind of using this to build a better society, because if you think about it, when you go out into the world, when you go out into society, there's always people older than you, right? So if everybody respects people older than them, then almost everyone will be respected, right? Clever Confucius, right? What's he talking about here? He says, the noble man does not abandon humaneness for so much as the space of a meal. Sounds a little cryptic. But what's he talking about? What does he mean? What does he mean? The noble man does not abandon humaneness for the space, so much for the space of a meal. For so much as the space of a meal. What's he talking about? I guess I can go back to Cindy because Cindy's got it here. So Cindy says the highest virtue is humanity. Okay. Casey says that we need to be capable of empathy. Yeah. If you look up empathy, you will. I think it comes from a Greek word, empathos, which is to feel with, and so empathy is not about noticing someone's feelings, it's about feeling their feeling with them. Okay, so if you're being empathic, you're not saying, oh, that person is sad over there, that's too bad. You're seeing that person is sad and you are sad as well. Okay, so Confucius is kind of making a plea for empathy here, right? Karen says you shouldn't drag someone down simply for your own benefit. Yeah. So that character of looking after humanity, of being humane, of doing things with human-heartedness should not be abandoned for any reason, right? You should never forget about your humanity in the pursuit of anything else, right? Humanity comes first. Empathy comes first. Virtue comes first, right? Okay. Now he's getting really tricky here. Now Confucius is getting really tricky. What's he saying here? Heaven has given birth to the virtue that is in me. That's a trickier one. That is a trickier one. There are 17 people watching this right now. There should be 17 answers popping up. Popping up. I should barely be able to get through all of the answers. There should be so many of them. Hey, there's one. There's one. Casey says, heaven ordains a course of life for each individual. Interesting, right? So what does Confucius kind of believe in? This is where he gets just a little religious, right? This is where he talks just a little bit about the supernatural, or larger universal forces. Most of what he seems to be talking about is kind of humanness, right? How humans should treat each other just because they're humans. But here he talks a little bit about something religious, right? He says, heaven ordains a course of life for each individual. What's he talking about there? It almost sounds like, what do you think? To me, it almost sounds like he's talking about destiny, right? He's talking about everyone is given a purpose, right? And so it almost sounds to me like he's saying, yeah, my purpose as a teacher and philosopher, is something that heaven has given me, right? That is my destiny. There are other forces that influence people's behavior. Yeah, so he says part of who he is and what he's doing has to do with, I guess, the order of the universe, right? Cindy says it's less a deity than a higher moral order, a kind of beneficent presence. Yeah, which is interesting because he's not talking about a god here. He's talking about kind of a force that is, the way that the universe works, which almost sounds like the Tao, right? But I don't think it is, because we said that Confucius is not a Taoist. But that's almost a kind of a Taoist-like idea, right? That there's this sort of universal balance or force behind the universe. And again, we encountered that noisy motorcycle. We encountered that in ancient Egypt, right? Ancient Egypt had Ma'at, right? They had that universal order of balance. We said that the Jains believed in sort of a universal order or universal balance, and gods weren't super important. And of course, the same thing with the Buddha, right? The Buddha was thinking about that you could free yourself from reincarnation without really the help of gods. Gods aren't really that important in the Buddha's tradition. And so here's kind of the same thing, is that Confucius is kind of admitting to this universal presence or this universal force around him too, that influences his behavior, that maybe helps him become a moral person. And yeah, again, it's kind of this presence, this feeling, this force, right? Almost sounds like a Taoist idea, but I don't know that it is. Okay, last one, Confucius. What's he saying here? To govern is to rectify. So if you lead the people by being rectified yourself, who will dare not be rectified? Confusing. Cindy says here, he believes that good governing flows from good men. Interesting. What do other people think? Casey says same thing, I think. Good governing comes from good men that lead by virtue and good conduct. Yeah. Yeah. So it's very interesting. If you think about, the first qualification for a ruler is one who serves moral rectitude. So he's trying to change society, but he's changing it from the bottom up, right? He's not saying, okay, we need a political system that, organizes everybody. He's doing it from the level of the individual, right? And he's saying that people need to practice rituals with positive emotion because it'll change who they are. People have to respect their elders and respect their family members and their parents and act appropriately in their families. And when they go outside, then they act appropriately towards other people. And that, as that respect and sort of moral action goes all the way up society, you get to a ruler. And if a ruler is doing all of those things as well, then the ruler will govern with virtue, right? And with respect and with empathy. And then you'll have that ideal society that Confucius is trying to achieve. But again, he doesn't start from the top, he starts from the bottom, right? He seems to be saying is, if we can make good people that treat others well, everybody will treat everybody well, including the ruler, and then we will have an ideal society, right? So again, he's kind of tracing it all back to individual people, and it all has to do with treating individuals well, simply because they're human, right? Not because you'll go to heaven or hell, not because you're trying to release your soul from this cycle of reincarnation. Has nothing to do with that. It's just treating people well because that is the right thing to do as a human being, right? Which is, again, not really a religious idea. It's a little more of a philosophical idea. Okay, how's the textbook decide? How does it describe the Tao? What is the Tao? Cindy, you're so quick. The Tao is indescribable, but we're going to describe it anyway. It is indescribable, and it cannot be seen or heard. It is beyond sense perception, so you can't see it or hear it or feel it. Yet, it is the source of life and the source of the universe. KC says the Tao is mysterious, yes, and it is the source of life in the universe. The Tao is mysterious, it is beyond sense perception and is the source of life in the universe. Individuals have developed a philosophy very different from Confucianism called Taoism. Yeah, so it's Tao or Tao. Sometimes the spelling switches. But it's the same thing, as far as I'm aware. The Tao people reject Confucian ideas about human development, and view social order as an artificial construction. Good. The ultimate truth transcending the polarities that make up life and yet pervades them, empty, yet the mother of all things. Whew, this is deep. And it is the way that cannot be truly attained. Wow. Super mysterious, right? So Taoists believe that there is this force, this energy, this sort of way that the universe works. It is everywhere and in everything, but it cannot be seen or heard or felt. But it defines the way that the universe works, right? It's the thing that holds the universe together. And again, if you're a Star Wars fan, and you're thinking about the Force here, this is very similar to that idea. And I feel fairly confident that George Lucas, who created Star Wars, basically stole the Tao from world mythology and religious tradition, and he put it into his movies and called it the Force, right? But you have kind of a very similar kind of energy, presence, mysterious thing that holds the universe together. It has some sort of will or desire for things to be a certain way, and people can, try to battle against it, or they can align themselves with it. But it's this mysterious, powerful thing, right? So the Taoists believe, and of course the Jedi believe, if you want to talk about Star Wars, that you want to align yourself with the will of the Force, or align yourself with the Tao. And so how does one do that? How do you align yourself with the Tao? He asked. So Casey says that in order to align yourself with the Tao, you need to seek a calmed and emptied and purified mind. Interesting. Cindy says, the mind must be emptied out. Just like right before a test, when you go to write and then your mind is emptied out. The mind must be emptied out. It must be calmed. It must be purified until desires are absent. That sounds like a very that's a very Buddhist thing to say, right? Sorry, was that yours, Cindy? Yeah, until desires are absent and a primordial natural condition is restored. Yeah, so I'll go into Thika here. Thika says the path is wide open to include the idea that individuals with a spiritual nature need harmony and liberation. Yes. And so the Taoists are saying there is this universal way, there is this universal force that is governing the universe, and to align yourself with it, you need to empty your mind, right? You need to get rid of all of the things that society tells you. You need to get rid of all your desires for wealth or fame or whatever it is. You need to get rid of all of that stuff and return your mind to a sort of natural, empty, calm state, which, when you think about it, is what the Buddhists were doing when they were meditating, and what we were doing when we were meditating a week or so ago, right? We were trying to calm our minds and kind of push aside our thoughts, right? And so there seems to be a very similar practice going on here with the Buddhists, with the Jains, and with Taoists, where they are trying to achieve some sort of mental state where their minds are not so busy, right? Where their minds are sort of calm and empty and free of desire, which is really interesting, right? They're all kind of doing similar things, but of course they have rationalized these ideas in different ways, right? They think they're doing different things, right? The Taoists think they're aligning with the Tao. The Buddhists think that they are working towards enlightenment and nirvana. The Jains are trying to kind of enlighten themselves in a way and free themselves from this sort of transmigration that's happening. Everyone's kind of doing similar things, but for slightly different reasons, in totally different places, which is, I think that's really interesting. Sorry, and Karen said here, making sure one has limited desires to corrupt them from the way. Yeah, so again, desire, wanting things, desiring things, takes you further away from the Tao. It takes you further away from the way. Okay, how does Taoism continue to develop throughout the centuries? And so we start off with this very kind of simple description of Taoism, right? This very simple description of um, this sort of mysterious way. And if you empty your mind, you can align yourself with the Tao, and then your life becomes effortless and easy, apparently. So say the Taoists. But Taoism continues to become more sort of nuanced, more complicated. More is added to it over the centuries. And so Cindy here says that a Taoist church developed. Yeah, so it seems to be taking on more of a communal character rather than just an individual one, right? Instead of just trying to calm your mind and rid yourself of desire, there seems to be kind of a community aspect to Taoists. Taoists are coming together in groups. They have priests and temples and monasteries, right? So they're kind of taking on some of the structures of a religion, right? Of a religious tradition. Taoists inspired spiritual masters who wrote text. Yes, so there's more writing that comes that sort of fills out the Tao philosophy. Very good. Lim says, developed communal prayers and rituals that could cure illness, free souls from hell, and win blessings from heaven. Okay, so that's interesting. So we have the creation now of a heaven and a hell as well, right? So it's interesting. I don't know enough about Taoism to know if those ideas came from other traditions, and so if they kind of borrowed the idea of heaven and hell from a different religion, or if they kind of thought about it and developed it on their own. But yeah, that starts appearing in Taoism as well, right? Yeah, so we have communal prayers, we have rituals to cure illness and free souls from hell, win blessings from heaven, and eliminate sins from the community. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting because Taoism sort of starts out as almost a very sort of personal spiritual practice, and then it evolves, right? It evolves into something that is a little more of a community-based religious practice, right? So kind of moves from the individual to the communal, which is really interesting. Okay. That's good stuff. All right. So here's what we'll do. We'll take a little bit of a break, stretch your legs, get a drink, whatever you need to do. When we come back, we will talk about ancient Chinese technology, and I'll ask you for your thoughts on what technologies you think were the most important and why. Okay, but we'll do that when we get back. So take a break. I'll see you very shortly, and we'll do that. Okay. Okay, good people. So, I think that'll about wrap us up with our good friend Confucius. I think we've learned a little bit about his life and the period he lived in. We've learned a little bit about how he looked at the world and how he was trying to create an ideal society by, in short, just trying to get people to treat each other as people, right? You're a human being, treat each other as human beings. And so, of course, he continued to create a much more complicated philosophy around that, but he was, of course, very influential, or became influential later in China. His ideas have found their way even into modern Chinese life today, which we saw in the video, and some of you have probably experienced. Um, and he's very interesting in that he is really one of the first philosophers that we have encountered, right? And so we've talked about priests and kind of religious leaders like that. We've talked about spiritual leaders like the Buddha, but Confucius is a different kind of thing, right? He is a philosopher, someone who is trying to find wisdom, and he's trying to find answers, but not from up there, right? He's not waiting for the gods to reveal it to him. He's actually trying to discover it down here. And in that way, he's similar to the Buddha, but he's different from the Buddha in that he is, for the most part, not very religious or spiritual at all. He's entirely concerned with how people treat each other and getting them to treat each other well, simply because that is the humane thing to do, right? That's what you should do as humans. Okay? So, the next thing I'll have you do is I have a little document for you to read in Microsoft Teams, and it's in the section under Files in Microsoft Teams, and it's called Ancient Chinese Inventions or Innovations, I think is what it's called. And what I'd like you to do is this. I would like you to read that document. It's very short. It's very easy to read. Read the document and then answer the questions that I put for you in Student Portal. And the questions that I put in there, you'll see in a minute, are this. So I'm going to ask you to read through these technologies. There's 20 of them. And I'm going to ask you to choose the three technologies or the three inventions that you think were the most important to people living in ancient China. Okay, which do you think were the most important to them, and why do you think that? Okay, so why do you think those were most important to the ancient Chinese? After you do that, I'd like you to think about how those three things are connected to other parts of culture, whether it's subsistence, right? So how people get their food. Is it connected to politics and governance? Is it connected to religion? Is it connected to families? What other parts of culture can you think of are these technologies connected to? Okay. And then the third one is, what technologies do you think that originated in ancient China? Which ones do you think are the most important for people living in the world today? Okay, so which ones have become the most important for us in the modern world? And of course, why do you think so? Okay. So I'm going to give you 15 minutes. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do that. Okay? 10 minutes to have a look at this. Answer the questions. Which ones do you think are the most important and why? And then we'll come back here. Wait, hang on. 15 minutes. I'm going to give you 15 minutes to do this. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. Okay? So go have a look at the questions. They're in Microsoft Teams. Go have a look at the document, which is in Microsoft Teams under Files at the top. And I'll see you back here in 15 minutes and we'll talk about some of these inventions. Okay? So go to it. Okay, so as you can see, a lot of inventing goes on in ancient China, right? We see lots of innovations that happen in China that don't happen in other parts of the world for hundreds or sometimes thousands of years, right? So the Chinese are actually very technologically advanced in a number of different ways. And so, what do you think? Technologies that are the most important to people living in ancient China. So, Eliana says here the compass because it helped them find their way when they got lost. Since there's no phone, there's no Google Maps, right? So, and again, people were, as we know from our examination of other societies, people are trading long distances already, right? So already by 500 BC, there's lots of trade that's been happening between India, between China, between the Middle East, between Africa. There's all kinds of trade networks that are already in place. And part of those trade networks are made possible by knowing how to get where you're going to, right? And so compasses are an important part of that. KC says row crop farming, paper making, and an earthquake detector still relevant to this day, just more advanced. But China were the ones who discovered these ideas and inventions. Yeah, so row crop farming would have been important to them, right? Because it increases agricultural output, and the more food you have, the more secure your society is, right? Paper making is good for writing stuff down, and yeah, earthquake detectors are still good too. Lim says rockets and gunpowder, these two weapons could be an important role for the Chinese army in wars. It's true, but interestingly, even though the Chinese invented gunpowder very, 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 very early, for a long time it wasn't actually used as a weapon. In some cases it was later, but it's kind of interesting. It's also interesting that those Taoists created it while they were looking for sort of some sort of elixir for immortality, and so I hope they didn't drink their earlier gunpowder because it would result in mortality. I think one of the most major innovations on paper is paper making and printing, because anthropologists can now understand their culture and their rules by reading the scripts. Yeah, that's a huge one. So not only does the making of paper and the printing press later get picked up in other parts of the world and used to spread knowledge, right, to disseminate knowledge, but it also helps us to know what these people were doing in the past as well. And I've kind of been hounding that, right? Is that the idea is if we can read writing, then we know a lot more about these people and these cultures and what they were what they were thinking and feeling. And so yeah, the paper and the printing press would have been critically important in the past, but also for us historians in the present, right? Jimmy says the first one is acupuncture because it's useful in medicine. Yeah, and of course, people are still practicing acupuncture today, and here in the West, it's actually becoming more and more common as people accept it as an appropriate treatment for things. And then Jimmy says bronze and iron smelting because they have an effect on life like construction and weapons. Yeah. So most people in the world, when they start using metal, they start using copper. And copper is a good metal to start with because it's usually very easy to find. It melts at a fairly low temperature, and it's reasonably soft, and so it's easy to work with. So copper is kind of a good starter metal for people who are starting to develop metalworking technology. But again, copper is kind of soft. And so if you make a sword out of copper, yeah, it's good, but it's still a fairly soft metal. And so when people start to create bronze, So they take a little bit of tin and they mix it into their copper. That creates bronze. Bronze is a lot harder than copper is. And so if your army has copper swords and the army that you're facing has bronze swords, you're in trouble because their bronze swords are going to cut right through your copper swords and you're going to die, right? So these types of technologies have military application, but also kind of agricultural application as well. But Jimmy, you're right. Yeah, there's a lot of metal technology that goes on. So first with copper, and then in bronze, and I think we saw some Shang Dynasty bronzes, pictures of them or a picture of one in the textbook. And then later on, people start to figure out how to smelt iron. And of course, iron's more difficult because it has an even higher melting temperature. And so you have to get your fire really, really, really hot. And that takes some development. Lim says earthquake detector because it can function to predict earthquakes, and yeah, it can help people reduce damage to people and property. Yeah, and very interestingly that doesn't get invented in the Western world for, hundreds and hundreds of years later, right? The Chinese are way ahead on that one. Yeah, the earthquake detector was pretty interesting, right? Not the kind of thing you think of in terms of an ancient invention, but the Chinese figured it out. Rockets, yeah, I guess today, because we wouldn't know, we've been able to explore a little bit of outer space with rocket technology, right? Okay. Boy, the earthquake detector is a big winner today here. Make sure fewer lives are lost during an earthquake. Yes, very important for people living in Vancouver here in this part of the world. Paper making that was used to keep records, yeah, and silk for clothes. So people were clothing themselves with silk, but also it was a huge financial benefit for China too, because they were trading silk with the Western world, and of course the Western world didn't know what it was and didn't know how to make it, and so the Western world paid huge sums of money for silk from China. So that became a very financially lucrative business for China for quite some time, right? The weaving of that silk. Ying says paper making to help people record history and culture. Yeah, of course. All those ideas that we talked about with Confucius, maybe none of them would have existed, because what did he do? Well, he went back to history, right? Confucius went back and read the history of the early Zhou kings, right? That was written down. If people hadn't written down anything, he couldn't have read it, and then he couldn't have come up with his ideas, right? Albert says paper making helped spread of literature and literacy. Yeah, exactly, right? That's an important thing for all societies as they continue on, is that literacy becomes an important way of communicating with the population. And so as we go through history, more and more people become literate, right? At this time in history, probably very few people are. Most people wouldn't know how to read and write. But of course, as you go further through history, reading and writing becomes increasingly important. And then using that printing press that we talked about earlier in order to print pages really quickly, that becomes very important, because then you can get your writing out to huge numbers of people very, very quickly and very cheaply, right? Whew. Okay. So that is all the time we have. Tomorrow we'll talk about a little bit about micropaper stuff, and we will continue on with China. I think we'll probably be in China for the rest of this week, but I'm not quite sure. But come back tomorrow. We'll deal with the micropaper stuff. I may have a new micropaper for you to do, or I might leave that to Wednesday. We'll kind of see how that goes. Some of you I owe an email back or a Microsoft Teams message back, and I'll get back to you very shortly. But other than that, I think I will leave it there. What about the assignment that was written there? I don't know what that means. Written where? Like, you mean the one we're doing right now? This is just for, if it's the one we're doing right now, it's just for class activities. So I don't want you to turn it in. I'm just kind of curious what you think, okay? If that's what you're talking about. Is that what you're talking about, Aliana? There was an assignment that was on the slides. Maybe let me. I'll talk to you about that after, and we'll figure out which one you're referring to. Okay. I don't think there's anything from today that I want you to hand in, so I think we're okay there. Okay, I'm gonna end it there. For those of you who were participating in the live chat, thank you. You did a very good job. Yeah, and I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, so that's it. Have a good rest of your Monday, and see you tomorrow. Bye.